Welcome to the More Love Connection podcast. This is your host, Jenard D. Moore. Before we start the show, we officially want to invite you to become a Patreon for the More Love Connection podcast. If you don't know what Patreon is just a way to support your favorite podcasters or content creators. For just as little as $1 a month, you can officially support the More Love Connection podcast. If you're interested, we'd love to have you as an official More Love Nation supporter. So go over to www.patreon.com/MLCXN. Again, that's www.patreon.com/MLCXN. If you become an official supporter, you'll get access to behind the scenes content. You'll get access to guests. You'll be able to know who the guests are before we even announce on social media, and a plethora of other things. So think about becoming a More Love Connection podcast supporter. We'd be honored to have you as an official supporter. Again, that's www.patreon.com/MLCXN. For just as low as $1 a month, you can officially support the podcast. Now, let's jump right over to the episode. All right, More Love Nation, welcome back to the More Love Connection podcast. Man, we have an amazing guest for you all today. I am so excited and ecstatic for you all to hear from our special guest that we have on the show. As you heard in the pre-roll, I'm going to be redundant throughout the show. Make sure you go over to Patreon and support the More Love Connection podcast. If you have ever listened to one of our episodes and found value in our episodes, please support. Again, as low as $1 a month, you can support the More Love Connection podcast and officially become a member of the More Love Nation tribe. So make sure you all go and do that. As always, make sure you follow the More Love Connection podcast on all of our social media platforms, Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @MoreLoveCXN. On Facebook, you can find us at More Love Connection. And we are ramping up our YouTube. So make sure you go over to YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button on all of our videos. Leave comments on the videos that we have posted. You can find us on YouTube at More Love Connection. But I'm not going to keep you too much longer because I want you to hear from our guest. So let me go ahead and explain and just tell you a little bit about our guest. Our next guest is the host of the Real Relationship Talk podcast, which is a podcast geared towards helping couples and singles find hope in their relationships. The Real Relationship podcast was also created for individuals to have a safe space to discuss their differences and celebrate their strengths. Our next guest has also been married for 21 years to her high school sweetheart, and together they have 4 children. Our guest is also a marriage and relationship coach. So get your pens and paper out, get ready. Again, like I said, this is going to be an amazing conversation. So I want to welcome Ms. Dana Shea to the show. Dana, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Jenard. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about our conversation today.
I'm super excited. More Love Nation, before we go any further, what I want you to do is go show Dana some love over on her social media platforms. Follow her now at Dana Shea Williams and follow her podcast at Real Relationship Talk. Those will be linked down in the show notes. But before we go any further, like I said, make sure you go show her some love. Spam her page with likes, hit her in the DMs, subscribe to her podcast, all that good stuff. So, Dana, again, thank you for, being on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe I missed something in the bio.
Yeah, I was listening to you talk about the bio. I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. It's interesting because I was one of those little kids growing up that was always in grown folks' business. You know what I mean? I was so curious about life and relationships. And I think it's because my parents did not have a very good marriage. And so I was very interested early on about I wouldn't have phrased it this way as a kid, but the dynamics of what makes a healthy relationship. And so I would listen as a teenager, I would listen to my friends' parents have conversations, and I would ask these grown folks these deep questions and had no idea what that was going to end up being, in my life. But I was just always curious as to like, how do strong marriages make it? Like, what makes up a strong marriage? And especially because I didn't have that example growing up. And so I think I've just kind of always had this curiosity for relationships. And then, of course, me getting married super young. My husband and I, we were high school sweethearts, but we also got married at 18 and 21, which I don't recommend, by the way. Just real talk, because you don't know who you are at 18, and you certainly don't know what it is like to sacrificially love somebody else at that young of an age. But God is good. And I think just everything that we've gone through in our marriage has really given us a desire to really help couples who were struggling, because especially early on, I think a lot of times, we would reach out, especially in the church, we would try to reach out to different couples, and it was just like crickets, and we would get very discouraged. And we were like, somebody's got to have gone through some of this stuff. How come people aren't transparent? And so we said, you know what, we want to be that couple that we never found. We want to be that couple who we're not afraid to talk about our story. We're not afraid to talk about our mistakes. We're not afraid to accept people right where they are, not after they've gotten themselves all cleaned up and tidy, but like right in the middle of their mess. And that's what we've been able to do all these years.
Man, it is amazing. Like you said, you all got married at 18 and 21. And, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, at 18, I didn't even know what my favorite fruit was, let alone, let alone trying to, establish a marriage. So kudos to you all for sticking it out 21 years. That's, whew, like, you all have been through, I'm pretty sure, some ups and downs, some highs and lows. So you all are, seasoned vets in the game. So just to that point of you all getting married at 18, one of the things, I have listened to your podcast and I really, really like, and I kind of want you to talk about it. And I know you have a bachelor's, I think it's in communications, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So kind of want to talk about communication in marriage. And one of the things that I heard you and your husband say you all did was you had a notebook. So kind of talk to our listeners about, what the purpose of the notebook was and what you all used it for and how that played a role in communication.
Yeah, Jenard, it's so funny because my husband had brought that up to me. We were filming or producing a podcast show on our podcast, and I had totally forgotten about that notebook. But even like earlier, you and I were talking about just being an introvert / being an extrovert. And my husband is definitely more on the introverted side. So he doesn't openly share his feelings a lot. He has feelings. Like sometimes people think introverts don't have feelings. They actually have big feelings. But he didn't know necessarily how to express those. And I lean more on the extroverted side. I think I definitely have some introvert tendencies, but expressing my feelings is no problem for me. And so when you get two people like that in a relationship, one is going to dominate the conversations, and that would be me. And so, so what would happen? Yeah. And so what would happen is my poor husband wasn't really able to share like where he was coming from because I was basically dominating the conversation. So he came up with this notebook idea, and it was literally just a spiral notebook. And he wrote me this letter, and he wrote about, what he was feeling, how he was offended, or maybe how he felt like he had offended me. He felt like it was easier to apologize even in writing. And so we basically found that this way of communicating was super successful because I could read all of his thoughts without interrupting. I could get a feel for what he was really feeling and what he was really going through. And I think it kind of even gave him more courage because he didn't have to like look in my face as he's saying these things. And so we just started this method of communication. He would write me a letter, and then I would respond back to whatever he wrote. And then he would write me another letter and I would respond back. And it actually ended up becoming like this intimate thing. When I would see the notebook on the bed, I was like, oh, okay, he's got some thoughts that he wants to share. So we kept that going for, I don't know, probably at least a year or two early in our marriage.
I have a question. So did you all ever, like, you saw the notebook on the bed, he writes you a letter or writes you his thoughts and you vice versa write your thoughts. Like, was there ever actual communication where you all said, hey, I saw that you wrote this in a notebook? Or was it just kind of responding via, pen and paper?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, so the notebook wasn't in lieu of real, actual verbal communication. It was like a springboard. And so he would write something, and then I would write something back. And then maybe at dinner that night, I might bring something up to him, like, I wrote you back, but I also wanted to ask you. I didn't understand what you meant by such and such. So,
Mm,
honestly, sometimes those conversations would turn a little heated. So he would be like, "This is why I wrote you," you know, because I
yeah,
don't think we can communicate about this. And so I'd be like, all right, fine. I'll write you back again.
yeah,
So it wasn't meant to take the place of that because, I mean, if you think in a marriage, you have to be able to have good verbal communication, but it was just a way for him to just be able to express, like I said, the way he was feeling without me like jumping right in there and kind of cutting him off or disqualifying the way that he felt.
yeah, and that's really good. And one of the things one word that you said was understanding. I have a bachelor's in English, so in my mind, everybody should be able to understand what I'm saying or how I'm articulating stuff. But I quickly found in my own marriage was my wife doesn't think the same way that I think, and that's something that you should know, ahead of time. And it was, but when you get into the marriage, it's like, okay, well, I'm saying this, but you're taking it as that. So can you speak to like the millennial marriage perspective of how do you get to that place of we're listening for understanding and not just listening to get our point across?
Yeah, I love that. So there's a guy named Danny Silk. He's based out of Redding, California. And so he wrote a book called Keep Your Love On. He's actually written several books. But in this book, Keep Your Love On, he talks about this whole idea of communication is not so that we can agree, but it's so that we can understand. And I think a
Mm,
lot of times in marriage and in relationships, a lot of times we'll communicate because we're trying to get our partner to agree with us. We're offended and we want our partner to understand why we're offended. So I'm going to keep on trying to communicate my point to you until you agree with me that I should be offended. Or I'm going to keep on trying to get my point across to you until you're on the same page as me. And what happens is that's usually very ineffective because we are two totally different people in a relationship coming at the same obstacle from two different vantage points. And so a big part of communication is learning more about your spouse or your partner. So for example, if my husband and I are having an argument about something, I can either choose to keep trying to communicate to get him on my side, or I can keep trying to ask probing questions so that I can get a better understanding of where he's coming from. I might not agree with him at the end of the day. We might not ever settle on that same problem or solution, but now I have a greater understanding. So let me put this in. I'm trying to think of an argument that we've had recently. Okay, we both work full time. I'm a pastor at my
mhm.
church as well as running my relationship and marriage business. And my husband is a first responder and he also has a lawn care business. So we work a lot.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've been able to learn how to really maximize the time that we do have together. And so we were having this conversation not too long ago, and we were talking about household responsibilities. And, I'm like a modern woman, okay? I don't believe that the woman should cook and clean and all of that. Like, I'm like, listen, whoever can do it better, do it. And if you can't do it, hire somebody. Like, I'm all about that. And so we were having this conversation, and my husband actually
Let's
said, I
see.
think it's time that we actually hire somebody. And
Hmm.
I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of commitment yet. And so we have kids, right? So I'm like, why do you need to hire somebody when you got kids? And
Right.
so I believe in hiring on the one hand, but then like when it's time to like stroke the check, I'm like, hold up. Because I'm also because
Like,
I'm also
yeah.
really frugal, right? And so we were having this whole conversation and we kind of started like really disagreeing about not just should we hire somebody, but it started getting into like the values, right?
Mm,
And so once I started listening to, okay, this is not a conversation about should we hire someone or not. We're starting to dig deeper into what he feels like is a marriage value. So I stopped trying to argue my point and I started listening, trying to understand. And
mm,
then we were able to have this great conversation about what it truly means to work together as partners. And so that's just a prime example of if I would have just kept trying to make him see my point, or if he just would have kept trying to make me see his point, we would have gotten nowhere. We would have stayed in disagreement. And then we wouldn't have been able to get to the real heart of the matter, which was we have a value difference. And it's not
mm.
his way is right and my way is wrong. They're just different. And different is okay.
I love that you said it's just a value difference, because a lot of the times in marriage and relationships, you get into those heated discussions, and it's like you said, you're trying to force your point on somebody, but you're not really understanding this person grew up differently from me. So their core values are not my core values. And one of the things, that I harp on our podcast is the two becoming one is extremely hard, because you're trying to basically create core values and values for your marriage, but you also have to, you don't want to just throw away what you learned in your upbringing. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to, understand, okay, well, this is how you value this because of your upbringing or something that happened to you in your life. But how do we create a comfortable place for us to move forward, in our marriage? And again, like I said, it's not saying that your values are wrong. It's just, I don't see the same value in X, Y, and Z. So how can we come to a place of this is, to agree to disagree, if you will?
Right.
So yeah, that's, man. Telling you. And one of the things you said, I want to kind of go back to, uh, for my wife and I, when we started the podcast, it was the same thing. Like, we saw a lot of marriages, and there's not enough marriages that were transparent. So when you get into a marriage, you are going based off of what you saw, or if you grew up with parents that were married, you're going based off of the experiences that you witnessed your parents go through. And it's like, once you get into it, like, why didn't anybody tell me the real deal? And I even have looked at some of your episodes or listened to them. You all are talking about sex, like the stigma around sex. So it's like, why are there not enough people talking about the real issues that are going on in marriage? Yes, marriage is fun. Yes, you have sex. Yes, you have kids, all this stuff. But getting down to the nitty gritty, we need to see, like, on a Tuesday night, me and my wife got in an argument. On a Wednesday, we got in an argument. You don't need to get to see all the Instagram posts.
Right.
But so how do you feel about just the transparency aspect? And again, I know you talked about it, but why is there such a need for marriages and to be transparent?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge need because you can't go where you've never seen, right? And there's this quote I like to say is that you become what you behold. And
Mm,
so in my marriage or in my life, I beheld this dysfunctional marriage in my parents, right? And that's not a knock against my mom. We've had many conversations about this. My mom's like, "Why do you keep putting me out there like that?" And I'm like, "Mom, because listen, like, I'm not judging you or faulting you, but that was my life too. Like, I grew up watching
right.
all this craziness." And so because I beheld that, if that was the only thing I would have seen, then inadvertently I would have created that in my own marriage. And to be honest, there's still some residue of what I saw in my parents' marriage that would try to rear its head in my own. And so I think that when I, as a kid, I was saying, like, I would ask these good marriages, I would ask them these questions. And the reason I feel like that I didn't repeat some of those same mistakes in my parents' marriage is because the couples that I was asking, they were transparent enough to tell me this
Mm,
is how, this is why. And I was, again, just struck by that as a kid. That was a seed that was planted, that you have to be real and honest with your story, because there are other people that are coming behind you that need to see a good example. So
right.
if I feel like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Now, I don't tell every single solitary thing, right?
Right.
Because there are some things that are private to you and your spouse, but then there are other things that are more personal, but that I feel like, you know what, this is a teachable moment. So I'll always ask my husband if it's a touchy situation, if I feel like it would dishonor him or shame him, I won't share it. If
Gotcha.
it's gonna embarrass me, I don't mind sharing it, because I'm it's hard for me to be embarrassed. I'm like, I don't have any skeletons in my closet, so I can tell you guys, like, this is what it
Every
is, you know.
right.
But I do think it's important, especially even in the church, and I've talked about this a lot. Again, I'm a pastor in a church, and so I'm not knocking the church.
Hmm.
However, I feel like sometimes we can religionize stuff and we can over spiritualize things. And you've got all these people that are nodding and saying amen, and they have no idea how to live. They had no
That's
idea of how to resolve conflict. They have no idea what do you do when you get in a situation where the Bible is telling you one thing, but all your emotions and feelings are saying a whole nother thing. And
yeah.
so I'm like, it is just time out for us pretending. And even as you said, like with the Instagram filters and all of that, like that all has its place and it's well and fine. But what people are really looking for is like real. People are looking for like, help me understand how I'm to live in this particular area. And so I think that's why I value transparency so much.
Man, that was good. And then just even with the religious aspect, this is something that my wife and I, we've actually been talking about this lately. Both are licensed ministers, but we watched Married at First Sight. I don't know. Do you watch Married at First Sight?
I don't watch TV.
Okay.
So my husband has to like tell me like everything that's going on. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's just, we've just been talking about just the church aspect. You know, we, again, both are licensed ministers. We grew up in the church, but there were certain things that we weren't taught. We were taught, you know, go and be a good husband, go be a good wife. But like you said, how do I live on a day-to-day basis? You know, and like you said, the Bible is saying one thing, but my feelings are saying, I do not like you right now. Right. You know, but the Bible is telling me to go love my wife as Jesus loved the church, you know, I'm paraphrasing. But right now, I don't even want to look at her. Right. So, you know, and I honestly believe, because I have had this conversation with a lot of my guy friends, like they're just over just the fluff of what social media puts out, what people portray. And it's just like, people want authentic truth. Again, that's just with some reservations. Now, I'm not going to be telling you everything me and my wife go through. It might be the general basis or the foundation, but I'm not going to tell you, oh, she said this, she said that, you know, because you don't want to expose, like you said, you don't want to expose your spouse. But this conversation is good. More Love Nation, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with you with more of the More Love Connection podcast. Hey, More Love Nation, if you all are enjoying this episode, stop what you're doing. Make sure you hit that like button. Also, go down into the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Leave us a comment. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure you take a screenshot of you listening to the episode, head over to your Instagram, upload it to your IG stories, and tag @MoreLoveCXN. Once we see the notification, we'll share it with our audience. Also, make sure if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform to leave a 5-star rating and a review. Reviews help new listeners find the More Love Connection podcast. So stop what you're doing, take the screenshot, leave a comment, just show some love. Another way that you can show us some love is by going to check out our website. Go to www.morelovecxn.com. Check out the merch tab. We have some sweatshirts, some hoodies. Go over and check out our merch tab. Also, for low as $1 a month, you can become an official supporter of the More Love Connection podcast. All you have to simply do is go to www.patreon.com/MLCXN. If you have not done so, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube, share it with your friends and your family. Again, that's the More Love Connection podcast. You know you like it. Go ahead and share it. Now, let's get right back to the episode. All right, guys, welcome back from that commercial break. So we have Ms. Dana Shea on the show. Again, if you're just joining us on the podcast, make sure you all go over and show Dana some love on her social media. Follow her at Dana Shea Williams and the Real Relationship Podcast. So Dana, again, like I said, I saw you all were talking about sex, and we just kind of alluded to the stigma of, you know, just religion and all that. Just talk to us. What are you all talking about over on your podcast in regards to sex? And because you're doing a whole series, it looks like, over on your show.
We are. So, you know, a lot of the podcast focuses on marriage. I'm actually doing a whole single series that's coming up soon. So it's not just for marriages, but I really did want to deepen our conversation about what sex is and how great it can be in marriage. I think so many times, even married people have a hard time talking about sex with their spouse, let alone like in the public for everybody to hear. And so whenever I find something that's like taboo, I want to just like bring awareness to it. I'm like, why? We're all adults. Like, why are we so afraid to talk about these things? And I think a big part of it is how we grew up. You know, a lot of us, you know, we were told like, don't talk about that. Or some of our parents never talked about sex to us. And then we grow up with these feelings of, you know, sex is somehow bad, or it's dirty, or it's shameful, or it's, you know, something that you just shouldn't talk about. Just do it, but don't talk about it. And so I found that a lot of couples were not having conversations conversations in their own marriage. So women were not having orgasms and they never told their husbands because they were embarrassed. And men were like, okay, I know I'm not pleasing my wife, but I don't want to ask her because my ego. And so
Right.
instead of people being able to just like have these honest, transparent conversations, nobody was talking about it. And then you get to the point where then people start introducing porn and other people into their relationships because they feel like their sex lives aren't fulfilling. And it's not that the sex life isn't fulfilling, it's that you're not capitalizing on what can make it fulfilling. So I was like, you know what? We're going to do an entire series. I'm going to say sex 50,000 times until people get used to it, until people, stop like grinning and like blushing at it. Like it is what it is. It's sex. I talk about
Right.
sex with my children. It's another word to me. There is no like funny business about it. And so on the podcast, we've been interviewing different people, not just experts, but just people who in their own marriages have found different ways to be creative. And I think there is a lie out there that says that married sex is boring, that like, why would you want to sleep with the same person, every single night, year after year? I'm like, listen, we've been married for 21 years and our sex life has never been better. And this like way better than it was when we were in our early 20s. You know what I mean? And the reason that it's better is not because we've learned all these new techniques and things. We have learned some of that. But the reason that it's better is because our connection is so much better. And so there is nothing like having sex with someone who you feel deeply known by, fully accepted, that you can try new things and you don't have to perform. Like there's no performance. There's just like, it's just different. It's on a whole nother level. So I just come at it like, you know what? There is no sex like married sex. If you're out here sleeping with God knows who and, trying new partners every other month, you're not going to develop the deep level of connection and intimacy. And that gets old after a while. But what's more, I think, exciting and, just great is that when you can actually build upon that with the same person. My husband's not the same that he was at 21. I'm not the same that I was at 18. You grow, you learn. And so I love talking about it. I love listening to other couples who are like, oh, we tried this, or, this is something new that we're introducing in our relationship. I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, I don't take everything, some stuff is like, well, that's not for us, but we're willing to try that. So.
And that is amazing because, like you said, I mean, sex is so taboo. And I have a lot of guy friends, and sex is one of the deterrents from them getting married. And it's to that same point where you just said that mindset of, oh, I got to have sex with the same person, for the rest of my life. And that goes back to the transparency for married couples and a level of communication that we as married people have to have with younger generations. People who are newly married. But I know for a fact, I have several friends who have that same mindset. It's like, sex is going to be boring with the same person for the rest of my life. But if you don't have enough married people talking about the fun and the fulfillment that you can have, and like you said, it's just, you can go out and try to find new partners, introduce all these different things, but is that really fulfilling you? Because what you're really doing is creating all these soul ties, and then you try to get back with your partner, and it's like, well, they don't do it like, person over here. And, so you can't really truly be intimate because your mind is somewhere else. But one of the words that you said that kind of rung a bell for me was connectedness. Can you talk about how do you get to a place where you feel connected with your spouse?
I think it goes back to communication. I talk about this often where in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, God talks about how Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. And that word naked, of course, we know like they physically didn't have any clothes on, but the naked part is also like there were no filters. There was nothing hindering their communication. They were naked, fully open, vulnerable, and they were unashamed, meaning that when they would express themselves to each other, there was no shame, there was no fear, there was no embarrassment. And so I think that in marriage, the more that you communicate and the more that you give grace for each other's weaknesses, that is what actually deepens your connection. It's a huge risk. Like love is a risk and it doesn't always pan out, right? But I think it's a risk worth taking. And when you're able to say, you know what, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to open myself up to my spouse with the understanding that they could reject me. They could not understand me. They could think I'm being childish or immature. They could think all of these things, but I'm still going to take a risk. And then when you take that risk and you're met with nothing but unconditional love, that's like next level love. Like that is something that your connection will go from a 2 to a 10 overnight if you can be that for your spouse and if you can give your spouse grace. There was something that my husband shared with me maybe like a year ago. And we've been married at that point. We've been married for 20 years. He had never told me this before. And when he shared it with me, I was just like, wow, like it gave me a newfound respect for him. The fact that he had carried this thing and he was just now opening up to me about it. I didn't look down on him because of it. It actually made me like appreciate him more. And so when he saw that response from me, that gave him like more courage to be like, oh, well, I can open up to her about things like this and she's not going to reject or shame me. Likewise, there have been things that in our marriage that I felt like, I don't know if I can share this with him because, again, in my head, like, what's the response going to be? Is he going to reject me? That feeling doesn't go away. You know, like when we're dating and you're like, I don't know if I can really be myself around this person. Like that feeling is still in marriage. And so we just have to make a conscious decision to overcome it as much as we can and then just jump in there and take the risk. And this is the deal. Let's say you do open up to your spouse and they're like, listen, I don't know about that. You know, you feel some kind of rejection or you feel like they're not really feeling what you're saying or whatever. You got to, again, be more vulnerable and say, okay, I just need you to listen right now. Like I'll tell my husband sometimes, I don't need a response or like a solution. I just need you to listen to me. And then I'll say like, are you able to do that? And he'll be like, yeah, you know, I can do that. And so that triggers in him rescue mode can like go down. I told you he's a first responder. So he's always thinking like rescue. I'm like, I don't need to be rescued. I don't need you to rescue me.
Right.
I just need you to listen to me. And so now I've given him permission to not have to like rescue me, but to just listen to me. And so I think I cannot stress the value of communication in marriage because without real communication, without vulnerability, without taking a risk, you're never going to be able to have a deep connection. Your marriage is just going to stay in the shallow waters, as I like to say. You know, we take our kids to the pool and sometimes, you know, they love to play, especially when they were little, they love to play in the little 2 feet because they can control it. You know, they can control what it's like in the 2 feet. If they fall down, they're not going to drown. They just get back up. It's a lot different, though, to go swim in the 5 feet when you're only 3 feet tall, because now you don't have any control. Now it's deeper than what you feel like you're capable of. But like I tell them all the time, or used to when they were little, you can do more tricks in the 5 feet. You can dive in, you can go underwater. Like it's so much more fun in the deep end, even though we think that the shallow end is better because we have more control there. And so in marriage, I'm trying to encourage people to jump into the deep end. Are you going to feel out of control? Absolutely. Every single day I feel out of control. However, there are things that are only found in the deep end that can't be found in the shallow end.
Man, that's an amazing analogy because it's something tangible that you can see, you know. And I'm just even envisioning standing in the 2 feet, and then you go to the deep end. It's like, oh my God, what's out here? But one of the things I talked about this on Clubhouse, and it was, are you a safe space for your spouse? And all those words that you just mentioned, connectedness, vulnerability, loving with grace and giving your spouse grace, that all comes from, again, foundation of communication, but you create a safe space for your partner to be vulnerable. And something that you did that I think I'm actually gonna start doing with my wife, because I'm a talker. I want to just talk again, try to get my point across, but just giving her that option. Can you fulfill what I'm asking you, or what can you handle what I'm saying? Because a lot of times, like you said, that rejection, we just talk, and then they don't know how to respond, or we have a level of expectation, and we assume that they should respond like this. But from their perspective, it's like, whatever they asking or what they're saying, I don't have the mental capacity to deal with that, or I can't fulfill that obligation. And so that goes back to that conversation piece and communication. Like, just ask the person, can you handle this? Can you do this? Can you not do that? And then you go a lot further. But one more question for you before I let you go. Can you just talk about, because you said the word grace, how do you operate in love and give your spouse grace? What does that mean?
So I love the word grace as empowerment. You know, a lot of times, like, especially if you've grown up in the church, right? You hear like grace is like unmerited favor. It's you getting something that you don't deserve. And that is true. And that is one side of grace. But grace is also the empowerment to do something that you can't do in your own strength. And so if I feel like I need to overcome some sort of addiction or some sort of something in my life, I need God's grace to do that. I need his empowerment. And so in marriage, you can give your spouse grace by empowering them to do what they feel like they can't do on their own. And so sometimes it can be tough love. Like my husband, again, he's more on the introverted side. And so a lot of times, especially when we were first married, he has a business. And so he would want me to be like his collections agents. You know, I had to call these folks and collect money. And I'm like, I am not on your payroll, A. And B, I do not want to be the bad cop all the time. When people see my name, they're like, you know. So I said, you know what, Sean, you can do this. Like, I don't mind helping you, but if you're going to run a successful business, a part of that is you're going to have to learn how to collect on money. And so I had to tell him, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And it wasn't because I was being selfish and it wasn't because I was being mean, but I was really helping to empower him to know that if you want to have a sustainable business, this is kind of one of those yucky things that you have to learn how to do. And so that is what grace looks like. That might look a little bit different than what people a lot of times associate grace with. The other side of grace, though, is be in that safe space, like you were saying. So if my husband tells me something, and it could be something against me, maybe he's going to confess something to me that he's done against me. Well, I have to be a graceful spouse and not shaming him, making him feel like he's the scum of the earth. My responses to him are super important, even if I have to put distance between us for a while. So I have to learn how to listen with understanding and try not to just hear what he's saying, but almost listen on like a deeper level to maybe what he's not saying or to listen to how he's feeling. And then my facial expressions, like my husband used to always talk about my facial expressions. And I'd be like, there's nothing wrong with me. You know, and he's like, you don't see your face right now. And I'd be like, okay, true, true. And so, responding with grace, I think is something that we have to learn, because it's not something that we just like come out of the womb knowing how to do. We are defensive people by nature. We are self-protective by nature. And so whenever anyone, including our spouse, gives us any kind of resistance, our default is to defend ourselves and to protect ourselves. And so when you, again, deepen that connection, you understand I don't have to protect myself against my spouse because they're not my enemy. So even if my spouse is telling me something that is hard to hear, my husband was talking to me the other day about being a workaholic, and I am. Like, I love what I do. I don't know if you can, you can attest to this. Like, when you love what you do, it's not work. It's like, I do this in my sleep. And so I'm thinking my initial thought, of course, was to be defensive, was to be like, well, you don't have a problem when these checks are coming in. You know what I mean? But I had to be like, you know what? That's immature. And I have to listen to what he's saying. What is he saying? He's saying he wants to spend more time with me, right? Because he doesn't care if I'm working, if he's not home. He only says something when he's home. So I'm like, okay, he's not coming against me. He's trying to explain to me that he wants to spend more time with me. So I'm going to meet his conversation with grace. And I'm going to say, you know what? I feel you. You know what? Yep. Let me close my computer for a little bit. What do you want to do? You want to watch something together? I don't watch TV. So anytime I do watch something with him, it's kind of like a big deal. And so I'm like, you want to watch something? You want to go somewhere? Like, what do you want to do? And I think that if we can learn again, to hear what our spouse's feelings are, not just listening like to what they're saying, but take it a step further and listen to what they're really feeling, and then meeting them with grace, not ever shaming our spouse. Like my husband and I, in 21 years, we've been through a lot, and I have not always done this right. I've not always done it well. I came from a Baptist background, and so it was all about hellfire and brimstone and righteousness and justice. And if you sin, it's like very clear lines. And so my husband is very, he's definitely the more gracious one in the relationship. And so I've had to learn from him, like, okay, everything is not always black and white. Like everything does not deserve like hell and damnation. There can be like some steps before we get to like that side. And so I think just understanding that, I truly believe that most spouses are doing the best job that they can. I really believe that. I don't believe that people are just out here, doing craziness and wilding out. Of course, you're going to have like some folks who do that, but the majority of married people, I really feel like are doing the best that they can. And so do we need to improve? Absolutely. We all can grow. We can all do better. But instead of always thinking about, we can do this better, you can do that better, how come you're not doing that? Like giving people props for where they are, giving people
Yeah.
props for what they are actually doing right goes a long way.
That's really, really, really good. And I did a show last night on another podcast that had me on. And that's one of the things that I talked about was the emotional maturity. And that's something that you said, uh, like your husband, because we're defensive, not responding emotionally, and just listening to what they're saying and hearing their feelings. And that stems from being emotionally mature, but that also stems from knowing who you are as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the biggest things that I am finding. I get so defensive really quick when my wife says something because it feels like an attack,
Right.
And like you just said, your spouse is not attacking you. They're telling you how they feel. You may have did something to them or you may have said something. We should be
Mm-hmm.
willing to listen with the intent to understand their feelings. But I want to read this quote, and I got it from your show, and I told you prior to the show I was posting it because it was really, really good. It just a great segue into this conversation. And I have one more question for you. I thought I was finished, but so you had a guest on, and they said the key to succeeding in marriage is not finding the right person, but it's about becoming the right person.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear that quote, what do you think of?
I think of personal development is a lifelong skill. A lot of times we've been taught again by our society, by the movies, the culture, media, right? Like you got to go out there, even in the church, you got to go find your Boaz or let your Boaz find you and all this mess, right? And so it focuses on some sort of external thing that you really have no control over. You're just supposed to kind of be in the right place at the right time, and magically you're going to come upon this great spouse. And that is just fairy tale. Like it's not about you finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person. So I'm coaching a client right now. She's a single girl. And I was telling her, I said, I want you to write down all the things that you want in a husband because she wants to be married. I said, I want you to write all the things that you want in a husband, all the attributes, right? Don't think
Mhm.
anything is outlandish. Just write it all down. And then I want you to write who you need to become in order to attract such a person.
Mm.
Because when we just focus on, I got to find the right person, but we're not actually doing our work and becoming the right person, like what gives us the right to think that that person's going to want to be with you? you
Right.
know? And so I'm like, even in marriage, like I have to constantly be becoming the wife that this husband that I'm praying for, that he will come into all that God has for him. I have to be becoming the wife that would be compatible to such a man. And
Mhm.
so it's always easier for us to focus on other people, because then that absolves us of all responsibility. But when we can say it's not about me focusing on what they're doing or what they're not doing or where they are and all that, it's focusing on like who I'm supposed to be. So I have to learn how to love well. I have to learn how to be more gracious in my communication. I have to learn how to stop taking everything so personal. I have to learn how to become more confident and not be insecure. I have to learn how to let go of my past and my baggage so that it doesn't continue to affect my present. I have to learn how to develop a relationship with God if you're a Christian, right? That's a huge part
Right.
of any healthy relationship. I have to learn how to do that on my own and not, just make an excuse like, oh, my spouse won't read with me. They won't pray with me. So I just don't pray and read. Nope. Like you got to be able to do that on your own. And so when we're so busy, like focusing on ourselves and developing ourselves, then we have no time to worry about that other person. And then what God does is he brings us that person, whether it's someone that you're already married to, or whether if you're
Mhm.
single, you're looking for that person shows up because now you're ready to receive that person. Whereas before you weren't ready because you weren't developing yourself personally.
I love that you said always becoming, and there's always room for growth.
Right.
And you know, I choose to believe that I said this on the podcast last night, like that I was on. Relationships should be 100-100, not 50-50, because if you go 50-50, then the other 50% that you're holding may be the 50% that you need to change your marriage. So when you're giving
Mm.
100%, it's like, hey, I'm giving all of me. I'm giving you my best, and I'm still trying to grow as an individual. So I believe relationships should be 100, and you're
Yeah.
always looking to become a better spouse, become a better husband, a better father, constantly working on yourself, and never feeling like I've arrived and the other person
Right.
needs to come up to my level.
Right.
So, want to end with this question here because our podcast is geared towards millennial marriage. So, if you could give a newly millennial married couple one bit of advice, what would that advice be?
Okay, first of all, I am proud to say that I am technically still a millennial. I like made the cutoff like right there, 1981. I was born in 81. So I'm like, I'm a millennial. I tell my kids this, they're like, you are not a millennial, mom. I'm like, I am. Like, Google it. Um, so I'm talking to my peers here,
Yeah.
okay? If there were one piece of advice, my goodness, that's hard because there's so much that I want to say. Um, I think if there was one thing that I could say is keep everybody out of your marriage. Like that includes family, in-laws, friends. Everybody has an opinion about what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. Now, what I'm not saying is that you shouldn't receive godly counsel, or even if you're not a Christian, that you shouldn't receive some kind of good counsel, some good wisdom. But when you have everybody having all access in, so like when I first got married, if my husband and I would have problems, I would just go to my mom's house, you know, and that was not good. And so my mom actually had to cut me off. You know, she was like, you can't keep coming over here, you know, and I appreciated that because it forced me to deal with my problems at home. And so if you got friends who are like, girl, you don't have to take that, or listen to, man, your wife is tripping. Like you got to be real careful about having other people giving their commentary into your marriage. Because at the end of the day, you're not sleeping with those folks. You're not going home with those folks. You and your spouse have to figure out how to make your marriage work together. So if there was one piece of advice, I would say give people boundaries up front. You know, when your friends start asking you about, you know, your marriage, how's it going? It's going fine. Or you can be like, you know, we're really going through a rough patch right now. If you're a Christian, hey, I would really appreciate you praying for me. Something like that. But to get all into the nitty gritties and, you know, this is what he said, and I can't believe he did, like, you got to be real careful about doing that. Because even good intended people will give you, well, this is what I think you should do. And that might not be what you need to do.
Right.
So that's what I would say.
Man, that is amazing. Boundaries, and
Yeah.
I've been planning on doing a couple of shows on boundaries because something my wife and I are going through, something that we've gone through, and I did a poll on our Instagram, and that seems to be the general consensus that people want to know, how do you establish boundaries, and if you have crossed certain boundaries, how do you reel it back to now reestablish boundaries. So more love nation again, man. Make sure you all go and follow Dana. If you found any value in this episode, if you liked it, if you like one thing she said, go and follow her over on Dana Shay Williams and Real Relationship Podcast. Make sure you all subscribe to her podcast. I don't have YouTube, Dana, do you?
I do have YouTube. I was really active on YouTube back in like 2012, 2013. I had like 3,000 subscribers and then I just dipped. So I'm really rebuilding that right now. So I was like trying to like post every day and I was like, this is too much work.
Yeah,
So
it's too
I'm
much.
on there, but it's not up to par, but I am rebuilding my YouTube channel. So it's just Dana Shay Unlimited, and Shay is spelled CHE. So just youtube.com/Dana Shay Unlimited. You'll find it there.
And I'll link that in the description. Well, Dana, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for being on the show. Again, more Love Nation, go show some love, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you, Jenard.
Thank you.